Hey everyone, I'm Joe. It's been a while, obviously. If you're even still here and watching, then thanks for sticking around for nearly a year. There was a reason for that, but I'll get into it at another point. But today I wanted to come back with a book review kind of video. I guess you could think of it similarly to the way PewDiePie does it, where I've just read a bunch of books and I'm going to talk about them for a little bit. And though I haven't read like 3 or 4 a month, I've read about 7 or 8 this year so far, which compared to someone like my sister who's read like 40 or 50 or something like that already, then it's kind of just scraping the bottom of a garbage can and flicking out what's there and saying, but look, I picked up some litter too. We're just going to get right into it. I'm going to go in somewhat chronological order. So I started off the year reading some fantasy. I don't really do a lot of novel fantasy reading. And the book I read was Garrison Girl by Rachel Aaron. It's an Attack on Titan novel, basically. It's basically a fan fiction, really, if you're thinking about it at all. And I just wanted to read something light over a Christmas break, and I picked this up at like December 30th and read it over into the new year. So this is my first book of the year, basically. I only had like a 30-page head start. It's good. I mean, I enjoyed it for what it was, for being like Attack on Titan content, but it's fine. It's honestly just okay. The characters are okay. It's got a kind of a predictable development with some of these characters, and characters that the book tries to make you care about end up dying, and it's just like, well, okay, that was kind of bound to happen. And the characters that are like the main focus is just like this, you can see right through it from the first interaction they have of what's going to happen. So it's not a bad book. It certainly was entertaining, and I read it in like 2 or 3 days at the very, very beginning of the year. And it kind of got my kick going, and I ended up reading Attack on Titan again, the manga, mostly after reading that. I'm not going to count my manga section here as books I've read this year, because it's, I don't know, it feel redundant like going through like multiple volumes of Attack on Titan or One Punch Man or Drifting Dragons, whatever, what have you. Alright, so going off my fantasy high, my family was watching The Witcher, and I didn't really like the show. Maybe that's an unpopular opinion. But I picked up the book because I saw it at Barnes & Noble one day, and I was like, I should try to read more fantasy. I've been reading a lot of nonfiction lately that was really depressing, and I just kind of want to get my spirits up. And though it really didn't boost my spirits, it certainly was entertaining. So, second book I read this year was I guess it's like the first of the Witcher series. I think there's like a prequel or something. The Blood of Elves by, I don't want to offend by saying it incorrectly, so, yep. I think he's Polish, but this book, it was really enjoyable. I think given the format, this kind of like shorter, smaller, thicker the pages, you could really easily read through and flip to the next, so you feel like you're making a lot of progress and not doing a whole lot of work while reading the book. That was really helpful, I think, to my experience reading. I know I'm someone who likes to like hit those next achievement points in a book, so that helped a lot. But not to mention the characters are great. Geralt, I'm pretty sure it's Geralt. The song, and I think the TV show says Geralt. But in the book here it says this guy is asking for someone that sounds like the name Gerald, so I can only assume it's then pronounced Geralt. Anyways, the Witcher, really great character. He's very fun, and one of those stiff characters that you like to see kind of in a story, opposed to the other larger characters like the love interest. I can't even remember a name. That's how much I love this book. Lady with the black hair, or whatever, the lilacs and gooseberry or something like that, opposed to her, and they're kind of in like this fair thing. And there's a part where he talks about like writing a letter that he just kind of regretted the way he worded it. And Ciri, the kid in the story that Geralt's training, cool characters, and of course Ciri is like the annoying kid who becomes like a lot more couth and well-bred as far as her training goes. This is a really fun read. The story is intriguing enough that I bought the second and third novels, and when I started reading the second one, it's in a larger format, this size, like width, and I read like 30 pages into it and I stopped. I wasn't interested, I guess. There was something about it that didn't intrigue me, and I don't know if that was the story, so I don't know if it was the story or if it was the format of the book, but I dropped it. No, hopefully I'll pick it back up again soon. So the third book of the year is this little, it's not really even an achievement to read this. 19 Ways of Looking at Wang Wei by Elliot Weinberger. First of all, the cover design is great. It's like all the characters of the poem kind of put together. And this book is talking about a poem by Wang Wei, kind of just generally called The Deer Park. It's got a bunch of different title translations. And that's basically what the book is it's talking about all these translations of this poem by this, I don't want to call it ancient Chinese, it's the Tang Dynasty writer, this poet, Wang Wei. How these translations are interpretive of the poem itself, but also the translator's writing and his writing ability and technique and style. And it's really interesting looking at how certain patterns of thought that were popular in a period, like philosophical thought and artistic movements, as well as language barriers and the way a language interprets something into another language. So there are parts in the book where it'll present you with a French or a Spanish poem in a different language, and then the English translation. So it's giving you multiple translations from a Chinese poem, and it just kind of talks about no one's really understands the original intent of the poem, and how we're basically are lost in translation with this poem. And I'm talking a lot about this one in a more analytical and interested way, because this was incredibly interesting, and it kept my attention much more than Garrison Girl or even the Witcher book, because it was something so interesting and not even relatable, but you could understand very, very easily what this book is getting at, and it maintains to be very punchy and in a good way, delivering that next bit of satisfaction. And like I said, it is very short, so sometimes a chapter is just one page, and that's really all I can talk about. So the next book I read was for a research project. I took a class on Japanese Imperialism, and I wrote a paper about the historiography of the Nanking Massacre. So I read Iris Chang's Rape of Nanking, which is a very, very famous book, subtitle Forgotten Holocaust of World War II. And it was really interesting, and of course I'm aware of the issues that a lot of historians and people within the historical community have with this book. But still, it's a very interesting read, and I think it gets at least the humanitarian angle of the Nanking Massacre, which of course 1937, a Japanese invasion of Manchuria, and they invade the then capital of Nanjing under Chiang Kai-shek. Really interesting story as is, and of course it's very horrific in its description because of the things that had happened during the Japanese invasion of Nanjing, and it's just a very enlightening look at this event. And of course, like I said, there are problems with it, but that didn't diminish from my reading of this book and the events that took place. And all in all, I think it was really interesting, and it's not too long. I got through it within like a month and a half, which was a bit slower for me, but it's only about 225 pages, and it reads very quickly. And the writing style, Iris Chang's writing style is pretty entertaining and interesting. I read this for that same class, but I wouldn't include these if I didn't enjoy these. This is called Japanese Imperialism, 1853 to 1945 by James L. Huffman. Huffman was a journalist for a while, and it's really short again. The bulk of the book is about 98 pages, if I'm not mistaken, 76 pages, but it's a super interesting read, and at the very least, it's a good introduction into Japan and imperialism. And of course, it's produced by the Association for Asian Studies, which, I mean, you can't get more legit than that for a topic. And of course, these are meant as just kind of like a survey, surface level introduction to a topic, and this is really good. And I was going to use the word punchy again, but I feel like that would be inappropriate. But it gives you lots of good graphics in here, sometimes, you know, whole page pictures, and really great context. And it does a fantastic job of getting you into that period of time and introducing that to you. So, fantastic little read if you're interested in Japanese history, and especially the Japanese Empire. It's basically like the better version of the Wikipedia article for Japanese imperialism, whereas the wiki article might delve into some minutia. Definitely would recommend. So amidst all that, I needed some sort of breather, some sort of break, I guess, and I was kind of slowly reading The Garden of Words by Makoto Shinkai. And I'm actually working on a video about this book, the manga and the anime. But this was in the light novel section of Barnes & Noble. It's not a light novel, but I guess it makes sense that they would put it there because it's a Japanese author and the book was turned into an anime. So, but it really stood out. I mean, all of Makoto Shinkai's books kind of have this same design with different color scheme and different cover art, of course. This book was really good. I think the writing style is fantastic. I think he really builds not the world, but the atmosphere and the tone in the book is very, very evident. And the only big criticism I have is this book is written in multiple parts over the course of multiple characters. And the brother character, the characters that are written in the first person in this book, as opposed to the third person, are way less interesting. And they take up like a significant portion of parts of the book, and it was kind of a slog to get through, and I ended up at one point skipping a page and having to go back because I felt guilty that I wasn't reading the whole book. But the main characters, the two main characters of the book that the movie was eventually made about, it's just really good, and the writing is super interesting. And I think there's a lot to unpack there, which I'll be unpacking in another video on my other channel, like I said, because people think, oh, it's a story about forbidden love between like this 20-year-old and this 15-year-old. She's more than 20, she's like 28. But that is not the case. I can get why people think that, but if they read the book, I think they would understand that it really isn't about that. And if you want to know more, I'll link my other channel. It'll be coming out soon. So a really fun read if you could get through the tougher parts. Alright, so a book I just finished today, Yukio Mishima's Sun and Steel. I've had to finish today because I have to drop it off the library soon, so that's why I ended up finishing it today, and I wanted to have it for the video. Yukio Mishima is a Japanese novelist, playwright. I think he did a movie or two at least, and he eventually tried to stage a coup, and he committed ritual suicide. What is it? Harikiri? Seppuku is the one you hear a lot, but this book calls it Harakiri. So I'll go with that, I guess. Yukio Mishima has a ton of novels. I haven't read any Yukio Mishima novels or short stories. I knew who he was, and I knew he was a novelist and somewhat of a political activist at the very end of his life, at the very least. And he's just a very interesting story. So I learned about Mishima through him instead of his writing, which I think is not a great way to go about it, because then I have all these kind of preconceived notions about what his writing is going to be about, and I'm looking too much into it and not really thinking about the writing. And not that this is a novel or anything. This is literally writing about his life and how he kind of values the old warrior ways of Japan and the Bushido. And he talks a lot about these classical ideas of a death of glory and honor and the good death, and you know, how he thrived and was happiest when he was kind of suffering, like in a group setting, like he was in the military for like a month and a half, and I said that was kind of when he was his happiest. And the whole point, the whole Sun and Steel thing gets to that Bushido philosophy that you should spend as much time practicing with your sword and dealing with your sword as you spend writing poetry and indulging in the arts. And I think that's what Mishima's getting at, is that these things are both incredibly connected, and they don't have to be separate. Because he talks about at the beginning how we tend to separate the idea of the academic and like the physical, and that's not the case at all. Here he thinks that we should really blur those lines and, you know, respect both sides of it equally, but, you know, indulge within both. Because, you know, people who are purely academic don't live their life to the fullest. They're not using their body's potential. And the people who are, you know, of the more physical aspects in life, they're wasting their life as well, because they aren't using their full body. They're not exercising their mind as much as their body, whereas the people who are exercising their mind aren't exercising their body. So, did that make sense? Did I say that right? I may have messed that up. But the translation is really good. I think Mishima's style comes through a lot. So it made for a pretty interesting read. There were parts that were kind of difficult to get through, but I got through it in the end. I just kind of did the whole finger under the line and sped through it, and I retained a lot of it, surprisingly, through that. But yeah, that's all the books I finished this year. I wanted to talk about, halfway done with The Poppy War by R.F. Wang. And they're a historian, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, studies modern Chinese history. Bachelor's of Arts from Georgetown University, and is currently a graduate student in the United Kingdom on a Marshall Scholarship. This is her debut novel, and what intrigued me was the connection to Asian history. That this is, and it is very evident. It kind of smacks you in the face if you know anything about Asian history, and you read this. It feels more like it's set in China than it is in a fantasy world that's based on China. And there's a Japan equivalent, and a lot of equivalents to Imperial Japan, and some older Chinese stories and mythologies, and it's a little too on the nose for me. And I was getting into the characters, and there was an invasion, there was a war happening. I was like, oh, this is interesting, and it kind of just fell off. And maybe I need to keep reading it, even though it's due today, and just kind of force myself to read a little bit of it, maybe get an extension. But I don't know. It's difficult for me to enjoy this, I guess, because it is very on the nose. Like, there's a book by Sun Tzu, which is basically the art of war for this world, which is Sun Tzu's Art of War. Sun Tzu, it's very on the nose. Yeah, that's basically all I've got to say, guys. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you're new here, there's a good chance that you are, but if not, and I've been a long-time subscriber since my hiatus, I truly thank you. I was dealing with some pretty intense personal stuff, and I don't really want to elaborate too much on that online to a bunch of strangers. But I value you, and I thank you so much for sticking around, and I hope you've watched to this part of the video, and you got some book recommendations at the very least, and can throw me some in the comments.